40 years of grading papers, attending parent-teacher conferences, and standing on my feet all day had finally led to this moment. I was 65 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't answering to a bell or a schedule. I had sold my sensible suburban house in Chicago, the one that had become too big and too quiet after my husband, Arthur, passed away 5 years ago. With the proceeds and my pension, I bought a small, secluded A-frame cabin in the foothills of the Colorado Rockies. It wasn't a mansion, it was rustic, with a wraparound porch that smelled of pine needles and damp earth. But it was mine. I called it the Haven. My plan was simple. I wanted to wake up when the sun hit the eastern peaks, drink my Earl Grey tea while watching the deer graze in the meadow, and finally read through the stack of novels I had been collecting for decades. I didn't want excitement. I didn't want complications. I just wanted peace. For the first 2 months, that is exactly what I got. The silence of the mountains was heavy and healing. Then came the call from Chloe. Chloe was my younger sister's daughter. She was 26, beautiful in a sharp, modern way, and entirely convinced that the world owed her a living. She worked as a brand consultant, a job title I never quite understood, which seemingly involved spending a lot of time on her phone and very little time doing actual work. When she called me that Tuesday afternoon, her voice was sickly sweet, a tone I had learned to be wary of since she was a teenager asking for gas money. She started by congratulating me on the move, asking how the cabin was, and then, without taking a breath, she pivoted. She told me she had been looking at property values in my area. She said that rustic cabins were trending on social media and that people were paying thousands for a weekend of authentic off-grid living. She pitched me a business idea. She would manage the online listings, handle the bookings, and market my home as a luxury retreat. I could live in the small finished basement, which she generously pointed out had its own half bath, while guests occupied the main floors. She called it a partnership. I called it an insult. I told her firmly that this was my home, not a hotel. I explained that I had worked my entire life to afford this privacy, and I wasn't about to share my kitchen with strangers looking for Instagram photos. Chloe didn't take it well. She called me selfish. She said I was sitting on a gold mine and letting it rot. She mentioned that as family, I should want to help her build her portfolio. I listened, I refused, and I hung up. I thought that was the end of it. I assumed she would move on to her next scheme. I was wrong. About 3 weeks later, I was in the nearest town, a 40-minute drive down the winding mountain roads, to stock up on groceries. While waiting for my coffee at the local bakery, the young woman behind the counter smiled at me. She asked if I was the owner of the new Mountain Zen Escape that had just popped up online. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I asked her to show me what she meant. She pulled up a popular vacation rental app on her phone. There it was, my cabin. The photos were from when the real estate agent had listed the house before I bought it. The description promised a luxury detox experience with a wood-burning fireplace and panoramic views. The host was listed as Chloe M. I scrolled through the calendar. The next weekend was fully booked. So were the 2 weekends following it. The rate was $400 a night. My niece wasn't just suggesting a business plan anymore. She had already executed it without my permission. She was selling access to my sanctuary. The rage I felt wasn't the hot, explosive kind. It was cold and sharp. I drove home in silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I got back to the cabin, I didn't call Chloe. I didn't scream at my sister. I knew that if I confronted them now, they would gaslight me. They would say it was just a trial, that they were doing me a favor, or worse, they would guilt trip me about family obligations. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to protect what was mine legally and undeniably. I spent the next morning on the phone with a property lawyer named Elizabeth Vance. She was recommended by the local sheriff, a man I had met briefly when I moved in. Elizabeth was sharp and didn't mince words. She told me this was fraud. Chloe was entering into contracts for a property she didn't own. We drafted a cease and desist letter, but Elizabeth warned me that these things take time to process. The first booking was scheduled for that coming Friday. I didn't have time for the mail to do its job. I had to handle this myself, but I had to do it carefully. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store and bought a high-definition security camera system. I mounted one facing the driveway and another covering the front porch. I made sure they were visible, but not obvious. I also bought a heavy-duty chain lock for the front gate at the bottom of my driveway. Friday arrived. The afternoon sky was gray, threatening a storm. I sat in my armchair by the window, a book in my lap that I wasn't reading. At 4 p.m., a sleek black SUV pulled up to my gate. The driver honked. I didn't move. A moment later, my phone rang. It was Chloe. I let it go to voicemail. The honking continued. Finally, I saw a young couple get out of the car. They looked confused. They were checking their phones, probably looking at the check-in instructions Chloe had sent them. Then another car pulled up behind them. It was Chloe's convertible. She jumped out, looking flustered. She was wearing designer boots not meant for mountain terrain. I watched on the security monitor as she hurried to the keypad on the gate, typing in a code that I had changed 3 days ago. When the gate didn't open, she started kicking it. I picked up my phone and called the non-emergency line for the sheriff's department. I told them there were trespassers at my gate who were becoming aggressive. Then I walked out onto the porch. The air was biting cold. Chloe looked up and saw me. Her face went from frustration to a forced plastic smile. She waved, yelling that she had a surprise for me, that she had brought friends to visit. She tried to play it off in front of the paying guests. The couple looked relieved, thinking this was just a mix-up. I walked down the driveway slowly, stopping on the other side of the locked gate. I didn't smile back. I looked at the couple and apologized. I told them that they had been scammed. I told them this was a private residence, not a rental, and that the woman who took their money had no right to this property. The color drained from the young woman's face. The man looked at Chloe, demanding an explanation. Chloe dropped the act. She started screaming at me, calling me a bitter old woman. She shouted that I was ruining her reputation, that I owed her this because she had already spent the deposit money. She confessed to her own crime right there in front of the witnesses. She claimed she was entitled to the use of the family assets. She was so loud, so consumed by her own entitlement, that she didn't hear the sheriff's cruiser approaching until the blue lights reflected off the trees. The sheriff, a calm man named Deputy Miller, stepped out. He asked what the problem was. Chloe tried to spin a story about a family dispute, about me being senile and confused. But I had the deed to the house. I had the printed screenshots of the fraudulent listing. I had the security footage of her trying to break the code. And I had the testimony of the couple who had just paid her $1,200. The sheriff informed Chloe that she was trespassing and operating an illegal business. He told the couple that this was a civil matter regarding their refund, but they could file a report for fraud. The couple was furious. They demanded their money back immediately. Chloe, realizing the walls were closing in, turned on the waterworks. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, pleading for me to tell the officer it was just a misunderstanding. She called me Auntie L, a name she hadn't used since she was 6. It was a manipulative performance, but I had spent 40 years watching teenagers try to lie their way out of detention. I knew the difference between remorse and regret. She wasn't sorry she did it. She was sorry she got caught. I looked at the deputy and told him I wanted her removed from my property. I told him I wanted a report filed. Chloe was escorted to her car and told to leave the county. The couple followed her, presumably to get their money or to follow the deputy to the station to file charges. As the taillights disappeared down the mountain road, the silence returned. It was deeper this time. I walked back up the driveway, my legs feeling a little heavy. I went inside and locked the door. My phone started blowing up about an hour later. My sister, Chloe's mother, left voicemail after voicemail. She screamed that I had humiliated her daughter, that I had destroyed Chloe's business, that family is supposed to support each other no matter what. I listened to the first one. Then I deleted the rest without playing them. I blocked their numbers. It was a hard thing to do. It felt like severing a limb. But as I sat there by the fire that night, watching the flames dance, I realized that peace isn't just about silence. Peace is about boundaries. It is about knowing what you are worth and refusing to let anyone, even blood relatives, treat you like a resource to be harvested. The legal battle dragged on for a few months. I had to testify. Chloe ended up with a heavy fine and a suspended sentence for fraud, mostly because it was her first offense. The family was fractured. I haven't spoken to my sister since that day. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I feel a pang of sadness for the relationship we used to have. But then I look out at the mountains, at the snow-capped peaks that turn pink in the twilight. And I remember the look on Chloe's face when she realized I wasn't just a prop in her life. I remember that I am the protagonist of my own story. I stood my ground. I protected my haven, and now the only guests I have are the ones I invite, and the only noise I hear is the wind in the pines. It was a high price to pay for solitude, but as I sip my tea and watch the sun dip below the horizon, I know it was worth every penny. I finally have the life I worked 40 years to earn, and no one is going to take it away from me.